I stumbled upon this video titled Losing Weight is Easy, actually. And when I saw that title, I knew I had to watch it because losing weight isn't easy, actually. There's a reason why just about everybody has tried a diet and why the vast majority of diets have been shown to fail. Studies show that when people lose weight, they're most likely going to end up regaining that weight and potentially more within the next few years. And as a registered dietitian who has worked with people with a weight loss goal, I can tell you that even with professional support, that losing weight is far from a simple and straightforward endeavor. And so I'm very curious to see what this content creator is recommending, particularly since he doesn't appear to be a nutrition or fitness professional. And then I can let you guys in on exactly how those recommendations tend to play out when people try them. Let's get into the video.
500% is actually doing what you said you would. Luckily, if you start a diet right now, there is a way, an easy way, to make it almost impossible to fail.
So right off the bat, there is no guaranteed 100% foolproof effective way to lose weight. Even methods that have been demonstrated to be highly effective, such as bariatric surgery, does not have a 100% success rate. And there's a lot of reasons for that, from basic hormone regulation and genetics, all the way to how easily are recommendations implemented by the individual. Some methods can sound really good on paper and be backed by a lot of research that shows that it can be effective. However, if compliance to that method is really challenging, then it's not gonna work.
Step 1 is to get inspired. There's always a spark that makes you decide you want to change, and it's usually seeing someone else who's way more fit than you, or seeing yourself in a picture.
So comparison can be a way to get inspired to lose weight. However, in my experience, this comparison is often more detrimental than it is beneficial. And the reason for that is that your primary motivation for losing weight is to avoid feeling shame for not looking like somebody else. And if you were starting out any journey to improve your health or to lose weight from a shame-based motivator, what's going to happen is that every time that you slip up or every time that things don't go according to plan, you are more than likely going to start beating up on yourself. The other reason is that comparing yourself to somebody else is a moving target. So you can probably always find somebody who's going to be leaner or fitter than you. And so if you're using comparison as your primary motivator, you're probably going to be in a situation where you always feel a little bit less than. And it is a lot less likely that you are ever going to reach a place of feeling satisfied or comfortable in your body.
So what you need next is a realistic goal that you can measure, as well as the time you need to achieve it by. For example, I'm going to lose 5 pounds by July 1st, and another 5 pounds by August 1st is something you can measure, and it even has a checkpoint to keep you motivated.
In my experience, this kind of goal setting almost always backfires, and there's a few reasons for that. The first is that weight loss is pretty much never guaranteed, and it's almost never linear. And so you can put in a whole lot of effort and not actually really see the scale move that much, and that can be incredibly demotivating. You are more likely to view any progress that you are making as not being good enough if it's not fitting the timeline that you think is appropriate. And a lot of times standards for weight loss, such as losing 1 to 2 pounds a week, really isn't that realistic for people, especially if you're thinking about maintaining that rate of weight loss week over week. So often the time frames that people set for weight loss are really unrealistic. And when they're not able to meet those timelines, which most people don't, they get really frustrated, which can undermine consistency. The other issue that I've seen pretty consistently with people really focusing on weight loss as being the only thing that they're tracking is that everything that they're doing and all the habits they're cultivating are just in service of weight loss. And how they feel about doing those habits and the consistency they have in completing them really hinges on what happens on the scale. So for example, if somebody has worked out consistently, has cooked all their meals at home, they've been well hydrated, they've been well slept, and they don't see an equivalent change in the scale, which is, again, really, really common, they're a lot more likely to not continue those habits and instead to go, what was it all for? I put in all this effort and I've seen no payoff, so why bother? And the truth is, if you want to improve your health or you want to lose weight, you have to continue to be consistent with those things. So anything that's going to lead to frustration is going to be counterproductive. The other issue that I see with this type of goal setting is that we tend to start playing games with ourselves around that time limit. So let's say that you set the goal to lose 15 pounds in the next 3 months before you go on vacation because you want to look better in a bathing suit. Because 3 months is a pretty long time frame, what we tend to do is put off starting to work on habits because we feel like we have enough time to get them down before the deadline comes up. And then what happens is that when we get closer to the deadline, we start to panic that we are pretty far off, and that is when we start restricting. So we start doing really squirrely, crazy, restrictive diet programs in order to achieve our goal in a short period of time. And as we all know, crash diets don't work. Or maybe you're not a crash dieter, but then you say, well, how is it that I couldn't get my shit together in order to lose 15 pounds in 3 months? That should have been reasonable. What is wrong with me? And here we fall back into that exact same shame spiral.
Then the next thing you need is a detailed and realistic plan. The plan might just be to replace your daily breakfast with instead a 1-mile jog, followed by a bowl of 15 big strawberries and 3 boiled eggs. Believe it or not, this one change is more than enough for you to lose multiple pounds of fat in just a few weeks.
I would not recommend doing this. First of all, 300 calories, particularly after you've exercised, as a breakfast is just not enough. That is not a meal. And in my experience, a lot of people try to cut calories at breakfast because that's typically the time where they feel the least hungry. And it's also a time where they tend to be busier, they tend to have better focus, and they tend to have better willpower. The problem with this, though, is that oftentimes when you are undernourishing yourself earlier in the day, you are more likely to overconsume at night. And so when people try to do this, what I often see as a result of that is that they tend to have bigger cravings in the afternoon. They tend to snack a lot more between lunch and dinner, and then they're more likely to have big cravings and to want to continue snacking after dinner. And then they typically feel terrible about themselves, and so they try to firm up their resolve to start over fresh with a small breakfast again the next day, which sets themselves up for the exact same cycle. And if you are exercising in the morning on top of that, that's only going to make matters worse. You want to nourish yourself during the time of day when you're actually going to be utilizing that energy.
But having the plan is not enough. You need to set everything up so that you can easily follow the plan. You have to buy the strawberries and boil the eggs the night before and get your running clothes ready so that when you wake up, the easiest thing to do is to just stick to the plan. If you don't boil the eggs and you keep buying peanut butter and grape jelly and you keep putting them at the front of the fridge where it's the first thing you see, then that means you don't actually intend to stick to your diet. You're just looking forward to that one day when you give in and make your high-calorie breakfast again.
So I do agree that having your environment look like your goals is incredibly beneficial. You really want the choices that you want to make to be the easiest, most effortless choices to make. So if the choice you don't want to make is easy and the choice you do want to make requires 15 steps and is really challenging, you're probably never going to make that choice. So I don't think that's bad advice. I think it's excellent advice. But framing it like if you don't do that, you just don't care and you don't want it enough is like, yikes. That's a pretty shamey way to frame it.
No matter how much you try to avoid even looking at junk food, you need to expect that there will be hard times. Like when you accidentally trip and fall face first into a booth at IHOP, you see that every item is over 1,000 calories, and you get the temptation to say 5 of the most dangerous words in diet history. A. One cheat meal won't hurt. B. I'll actually start dieting tomorrow. C. I just won't eat later. Or D. Maybe I'll just start bulking.
So now the issue with those first two is that it frames the process of improving your health or losing weight as being a diet protocol that you are following. So you can either be on program or off program. And the issue is that framing things this way really has us fall into all or nothing thinking, where if we make one dietary indiscretion, then we've ruined it and we might as well just go nuts and start fresh tomorrow. The second part of this, which relates to option C on this list, is I won't eat later. So what will happen is they will have a binge and then they will say, I'm going to start fresh tomorrow. And typically what that looks like is eating less than they usually would to make up for the fact that they had a binge the night before. But the challenge is, as I mentioned before, is that when we undereat in the day, we make it more likely that we are actually going to binge later. So this can create what's called a binge and restrict cycle.
And it's times like this when you need willpower, which is the ability to tell yourself no. You can build up your willpower by anticipating all the excuses you're going to make and practicing saying no to all of them. But keep in mind that willpower isn't infinite, so you can't always rely on it. You're better off just avoiding the temptation in the first place.
So what this video is suggesting is that the best way to lose weight is to strip all processed and hyper-palatable, pleasurable foods out of your diet and to stick to that rigidly forever. And while, yes, technically that probably is a pretty good way to lose weight, it's also not realistic. The issue is that when you're trying to get in the habit of always saying no and sticking to these really strict food rules is that the likelihood is that when you slip up, you're more likely to binge, because when you're saying, I'm never going to eat at IHOP again, what you're doing is elevating the status of IHOP in your mind. That is now a scarce food that you are not going to have the opportunity to have again. So then when the opportunity does present itself, your brain goes, oh, I need to jump on that opportunity and get it now, because if I don't have it now, I'm never going to have it again because the diet starts tomorrow. And so what I often find with my clients who are trying to stick to this level of rigidity is that they're actually eating those hyper-palatable foods a lot more often, because you're more likely to eat a large volume if you're thinking that this is the last time you're ever going to have them. And so that practice is really counterproductive. Instead, it is better to work on having a better relationship with those more palatable foods that you really enjoy and be very intentional about how much and how often you're including those foods.
Finally, the real cheat code to motivation is doing something for so long that it becomes a habit. If you can get to the point where you wake up and automatically go outside for a jog, and you automatically reach for the strawberries and boiled eggs, then the plan becomes 100 times easier to follow.
So this is a really common belief that they can just stick to the plan for long enough that it's going to become habit. The problem with that, though, is that the habits that we cultivate are only going to be resilient in the environment under which we cultivated them in the first place. And so what I mean by that is that If you decide that you're going to start a weight loss journey at a time when work's not that crazy and your kids are in school and you have a lot more time on your hands, the habits you cultivate are probably going to work in that more chilled out, slower paced environment. But as soon as things change, your environment change, maybe you move, maybe you switch jobs, maybe things at work get more busy, maybe it's summertime and you're having to entertain your kids, all of those habits fall apart. And when it comes to lifestyle, there's really only one guarantee, and that is that your lifestyle is not constant. So you have to get comfortable with the idea that you're never going to get into a rutted habit like this. And so we really need to break away with the idea that if you just do it long enough, it's going to be automatic, because it's not going to be. You need to plan for the fact that your life is going to ebb and flow, or else what's going to happen, and this is what happens with most people, is they're able to maintain a certain healthy lifestyle for a period of time until things get crazy and then everything falls apart and then they end up back where they started.
So to really measure your progress, you should weigh yourself maybe once every morning. Just know that it could fluctuate a lot based on water weight or the types of foods you eat, which means you might lose a pound of fat, but your weight might not change right away. So instead of looking at your day-to-day progress, just look at your average week-to-week progress.
So weighing yourself daily, that actually can be effective for some people, but I find that for a lot of people, it can cause a lot of harm, and it again can mess with consistencies. As he mentioned very accurately, weight can fluctuate day to day and week to week, and weight loss is never linear. People will stall out for periods of time. They may gain and then lose and then gain and then lose and then gain and then lose. And the problem is that we have a very strong emotional reaction to what we see on the scale. And in my experience, for many people, doesn't matter what number you're seeing on the scale, it's probably going to mess with your head. When someone gets on the scale, a few things happen. If the weight stays the same or has gone up, typically what happens is that people will either say, well, it, what was all this for? I'm going to go get donuts then. Or they say, oh shoot, I need to cut more calories. I need to be more restrictive. And that's either going to lead people into a rate of weight loss that is really unhealthy and unsustainable if they're able to maintain that level of restriction. And that's where we get into an eating disorder space. Or they're not going to be able to maintain the restriction and it's going to result in a binge. When people see that the weight has dropped, some people may feel that that is really motivating. Some people will say, I want to keep up the momentum, so I'm going to cut more. I'm going to accelerate this since I'm on a roll. And again, that's where we get into the disordered eating space, or where things might become unsustainable and then you rebound the other way. Or people may say, hey, I'm doing really good. I might as well go out and have the donuts. So I find that for a lot of people, and this is not everybody, but for a lot of people, weighing yourself daily or honestly even weekly is not really that helpful, because in almost every case, it's going to mess with how consistent you are at maintaining your habits.
The traditional, optimal way to figure out how many calories you should be eating is to use an online calorie calculator, and then eat around this number every day as a starting point to lose weight. But it's worth noting that this number can be way off, since everyone has a different metabolism, and it can especially be off for people with hormonal problems. So the best way to know for sure is to start with this number, and then see how your weight changes over the next few weeks. If you find that each week your weight is not changing, then you need to lower your daily calories by another 200 to 300. And if you ever reach a point where you haven't lost any weight for at least a week, you'll either need to reduce your calories again, or you could also just add in some more exercise. The only problem is, you have to count exactly how many calories you eat per day, using nutrition labels, calorie counting apps, mental math, and also food scales, which measure exactly how much of each food you're eating in grams.
Now, I am not a big advocate for counting calories for a lot of the reasons that he stated in this video. First is that it's a moving target. The calorie estimators that you find online are not necessarily accurate. They're a rough guess that can be influenced by a lot of factors. The other thing is that it's incredibly labor intensive, and the truth is that no matter how you lose weight, you kind of have to keep doing that thing in order to maintain the weight that you've lost. And so if you are losing weight through calorie counting, in all likelihood, you'll have to continue calorie counting in order to maintain the weight that you've lost. And I think that is really unrealistic for most people. Most people do not want a calorie count for the rest of their life in order to maintain their weight loss. And the truth is, calorie counting is so imprecise that even if you were going to stick to that, it's not going to guarantee that you lose weight anyway.
And that brings us to the method of how to lose fat without counting calories. The number one trick is to just start slowly eating more minimally processed foods, avoiding junk, chips, sugary desserts, stuff with lots of refined carbs, and instead swapping that out for fruits, vegetables, lean dairy, lean protein, healthy fats, and whole grains. You'll find that these foods are so filling and nutritious that you can eat in a calorie deficit every single day without having to feel that hungry.
This is a point that I don't disagree with at all. I think it's really great advice, because eating a lot more unprocessed or minimally processed foods, particularly whole plant foods, is a lot less calorie dense, but is high volume and a lot more satiating. And so it's true that you can be more satisfied with your meals at a lower calorie level, which can be beneficial and can really cut down your need to calorie count, which is a benefit. However, I worked for a coaching program that taught this for a number of years, and I find that people really struggle with this over the long term. And I think part of it has to do with the pleasure gap. So yes, absolutely, this is good advice, but also make sure that you're actually enjoying what you're eating and figure out how to eat those foods in a way that is pleasurable to you.
Another tip is to just stop snacking and only eat during meals. Most people snack on high-calorie, tasty junk food because they're bored, stressed, or thirsty, not because they're hungry. So cutting out snacks is actually one of the easiest things you can do, since the body doesn't really need them anyway, and over time, you'll just stop getting the urge to snack.
So yes, eating a lot of high-calorie, hyper-palatable snack foods can be challenging, and cutting that out can be beneficial. However, I think one of the challenges is that a lot of the times when people are craving those snacks, a big reason why that happens is because you undernourish yourself earlier in the day. So his advice to have a smaller breakfast that's only 300 calories after exercising is probably going to make this advice to not snack a lot harder to accomplish. And also, this advice to never snack really breaks down for anybody who's neurodivergent, because food for somebody who's neurodivergent is not about eating out of boredom. It's a way to meet stimulation needs.
Number 1, start drinking lots of water. Water is very filling, and half of the time when you're hungry, a quick drink of water will get rid of the feeling. This will also prevent you from craving high-calorie drinks like soda, juice, bubble tea, and milkshakes.
I don't know that I've ever had somebody stop craving a milkshake because they had water. I mean, water is great and it is important to stay hydrated, but this, in my experience, doesn't actually work that well.
Number 2, if you keep saying, today doesn't count, the real diet starts tomorrow, then it'll never start.
Yeah, don't say this diet starts tomorrow, sure, but also maybe don't say I'm on a diet. Maybe just focus on making environmental changes in your lifestyle that support the health goals that you want to have, and not think about it being a protocol that you're following.
Number 5, you can make healthy meals like this and this taste good with 0-calorie condiments and spices and sauces and 0-calorie sweeteners. But don't overuse them, because in general, the tastier your food is, the more cravings you'll get for tasty food.
Ooh, okay. So again, this whole idea of don't make your food tasty because it's going to make you want more food really plays into this idea that in order to be a good and virtuous person, you should be living in an ascetic lifestyle when it comes to your food. Like, this is Kellogg's all over again. You are not a better person because you don't get pleasure from your food. In fact, seeking to have a diet that is devoid of pleasure is more likely to cause a binge than it is to actually work. Food has a lot of roles in our life. It can be fuel, it can be comfort, it can be entertainment, it can be community, it can be tradition, it can be a lot of things. And whenever somebody tries to lose weight or improve their health, they like to strip every other role away from food and just make it about fuel. And there's this feeling that in order to be a good person, we should be able to eat food as fuel and not worry about pleasure. And that pleasure seeking when it comes to food is somehow not virtuous and not what we should be doing. And I think that the problem is that almost everybody universally struggles with that in practice. We can't eat bland, boring food for a long period of time. And so I think that fighting with yourself over that for years and going on and off and on and off and on and off diets is a waste of time. It's not particularly good for our body, and it creates a really troubling relationship with food instead of acknowledging, hey, I want food to be tasty. I also have health goals though. And so how can I marry these two? How can I have foods that I find delicious and tasty on a regular basis so that I don't feel deprived while at the same time nourishing my body in the way that I need to in order to meet my health goals? I think a lot of times when it comes to nutrition for weight loss, we are a little bit too honed in on the nutrition science in a way that on paper is very effective, but in practice is very unsustainable. So if you've tried this and you keep bashing your head against the wall because you're going back to eating stuff that tastes good, you're human. That makes sense as to why you're doing that.
Many people find it easy to be in a calorie deficit when doing intermittent fasting. It involves only giving yourself a 48-hour window to eat, and then not eating the rest of the day.
So intermittent fasting, I definitely want to do a deep dive on this, but in general, I would say that intermittent fasting sounds really good on paper. I used to work for a company that promoted intermittent fasting, and in my experience working with people who were trying to accomplish a 16-8 intermittent fast, what would typically happen is they would skip breakfast because that is the easiest meal to skip because we're less hungry in the morning and it's easier to get caught up with work and get busy and not notice you're hungry. But what tends to happen is that when they're, not eating until noon and they're just having lunch and dinner often is huge, and then they tend to be hungry and have cravings for more calorie dense foods after the fact. And typically what will happen is even if they eat and they feel full, their brain is still kind of wired and hungry. And so in my experience, people will actually eat more that way. They may be cutting out some snacks, so maybe the calorie balance would be about the same, but I have found that in practice, practice, a lot of people really struggle with intermittent fasting in a practical sense. Now, if it works for you, awesome. If it doesn't work for you, I'm not surprised. You're not alone.
Number 11. Eat more protein because protein makes you feel satisfied, and you also burn about 20 calories just to digest 100 calories of protein.
But I don't love this very common trend in weight loss advice of really having a heavy emphasis on macronutrients. A lot of times people are over-focusing on protein. They can make food decisions that reduces the overall diet quality. I also think for a lot of people, the protein goals they're aiming for are unnecessarily high. Like there's no harm in having a high level of protein, but it's also not a benefit. And I think that this drive to do more and more protein is crowding out a lot of other beneficial foods. I also think that it tends to lead people to construct meals that are a lot less pleasurable and a lot less satisfying. So it's not a bad thing to do, and there is research that shows that protein is very satiating. However, people have been trying to do a high protein, low carb diet for ages, and a lot of people still cycle on and off and on and off and on and off. I think that that really huge emphasis on protein and having a lot of it for a lot of people just becomes a food rule that is hard to accomplish or can lead to something that is unsustainable.
If you want to, try black coffee or tea, since caffeine slightly boosts your metabolism.
It says tastes awful and stops cravings. Why would you drink something that tastes awful? It really seems like a guide to like how to hate your life. Oh my goodness.
Number 14, use smaller plates, smaller bowls, and smaller portion sizes.
Ah, the 90s called. They want their diet advice back. This is a really common one, and I've had a lot of clients try this, and I have never once had it work for anybody. Again, if it worked for you, awesome, but that doesn't work for a lot of people.
If you mess up, don't take it as an excuse to start eating tons of junk food, because even though messing up wasn't part of the plan, giving up was never part of the plan.
I totally agree with that. We need to just kind of brush off and move on from choices that maybe we wish we hadn't made. However, I also feel as though the diet protocol that this guy is recommending is, while technically, yes, maybe not bad advice, probably is going to set somebody up for messing up quite a bit.
Now on to exercise. It burns some calories, it improves your health, and once you experience what it really takes to burn 200 calories, you're probably less likely to pop open a 200-calorie bag of chips.
No. Okay. This makes food and exercise transactional. I cannot tell you how many people are recovering from a toxic relationship with exercise because exercise was only viewed as a way to burn off food. Thinking about food and exercise in this frame is a great way to hate food and exercise. No, exercise because it feels good. Do something that you like to do, and don't think about calories. Just think about how it makes your body feel. Please, for the love of God, don't feel like you have to earn your food through exercise. That is a fast track into a disordered relationship with food and exercise. I also want to say that for a lot of people, they don't like exercise because it feels like the punishment they have to put themselves through to earn thinness. And that is never going to be sustainable for anybody.
Lastly, a fat loss tip that everyone thinks doesn't apply to them is to get good quality sleep.
So yeah, sleep's important. Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons why people don't sleep well. A lot of things that are really hard to modify. So if you have insomnia or sleep apnea or a number of other things that make it hard, I think hearing advice like this can feel really painful because there's not a lot that you can do. If you are not one of those people, if you are somebody who is just burning the candle at both ends and you could sleep more but you're not, sleep more. I have had a number of clients who will stay up really late because they feel like they need that extra time to recover from burnout, not realizing that one of the big reasons why they're so burnt out is that they're not getting enough sleep. So if you are in a position to prioritize that, please do. So overall, I think a lot of the advice in here is pretty run-of-the-mill. None of it is bad or revolutionary advice. It is all pretty simple, but it's all really hard to implement and stick to. And the success of this really hinges on someone being very consistent and very regimented, which I think is really hard to accomplish if you have any other priority in your life. I think one of the biggest things that strikes me about advice like this is it really hinges on the idea that if you have committed the sin of being in a larger body, in order to fix that, you have to punish yourself essentially by removing all of the pleasure out of food, by sort of making every single social interaction a high stakes situation where you can either pass or fail based on your food choice. And that aspect of this video I think is incredibly harmful. So if you're watching that and you're going, yeah, I can do that. That sounds easy. I can do that. And then you try it and you struggle, yeah, you're gonna struggle with it. It's really not that easy, actually.